Welcome. For those who don't know me, I'm Darlene McLennan, and I'm my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, or ADCET for short. This session is being live captioned, and you can enable those captions by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And we also have captions available in the browser, and the team will put that into the chat box now. We are recording this session, which you would have been notified. If you don't want to have your image recorded, please hide your camera. We will have chat and Q&A, which we'll cover at the end of this session, or maybe the presenters, Ella will talk about how engaging she wants it. I probably forgot to ask that question, Ella, at the beginning. So anyway, you are in the session, Adapting UDL for Your Context, Designing for Diversity. And I want to welcome Dr. Ella Collins-White, who will be presenting with us today. She also has members of her team in the back end, who will also be helping with that presentation. So, which is fabulous. So I'll hand over to you, so I'm not stumbling along anymore. And yeah, thank you so much, Ella, for this presentation. Really looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. You might hear some dinging. I think that's people coming into the room, so don't mind that too much. So we're here today for the Adapting UDL for Your Context, Designing for Diversity. And as you can see here, there's a lot of names on my first slide, because it's really been a team effort, and I'm really presenting on behalf of my whole educational innovation team. So today we have Samantha and Sarah here as well, and they'll be helping out with questions and later on with some of the activities. And I think I also saw coming in Michelle, Alessandra, Kriya, Min, and Monique, as well as some of our other members. So they also might be contributing and offering some feedback in the later session as well, because they've helped put this presentation together too. So thank you everybody for being here. It is a workshop, so please feel free to share in the slide, share in the Zoom chat. We have some activities to engage with, so I would love people to interact with those as they're able to. And later on in the presentation, we have a little check-in at the end in form of a Mentimeter, but we'll give people options to either contribute in the chat or contribute vocally if that is your preferred method. So I'll get started today. Oops, wrong thing. There we go. So as I mentioned about this session, so Darlene has already taken us through all of this, but I just wanted to remind anyone joining us that it is a recorded session. And if you don't wish to appear on screen, please just make sure your camera's off. It is going to be interactive, so I would love for everybody to engage in the chat or in the various other means that we have available to you. I'm also happy for people to put their hand up and ask questions at any point, or to tell me to slow down if I start speaking too quickly. I'm trying to moderate my pace, but please do let me know if I start to zoom ahead. All right. So I would like to begin today with an acknowledgement of country. And I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which the University of Sydney is built, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. But I would also like to acknowledge and pay respect to the area that I'm currently in, which is the lands of the Wangal people. As I'm zooming from my home in Campsie. It's a beautiful sunny day, and today I'm wearing an orange shirt and I have short brown hair. And I might have some sun coming in on my face later on because I've got a window that's facing right towards the direction that the sun is coming. So you might see me light up with sun at some point. And I would like to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and to any First Nation people in attendance. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning, and research practices within this space, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within Aboriginal custodianship of country. And I think today and on Tuesday as well, we had so many wonderful people sharing their different experiences in the ways that they've tried to create inclusive spaces And I think that is so important, and acknowledging country is one way to do that as well. So I'm so happy to hear and see that in almost like in every single presentation that I've been in throughout this workshop, throughout this whole conference. So that's been really fantastic. Just another thing to think about inclusivity and the way in which this workshop has been designed with intentionality. I would like to just mention that we have really intentionally designed this workshop to try and be inclusive for everybody here today. We've tried to consider a range of learners coming from different perspectives and different teaching and educational roles across the tertiary and post-secondary sector. So we're aiming to offer a space in which many voices and perspectives can collaborate together, and to consider how inclusive teaching might be facilitated in all of our different contexts. Our aim is to spark conversation and ideas around how you might work towards designing for diversity in your different educational contexts by learning from us and from each other. So I'm going to share a little bit today about some of the things that we've done to upscale and integrate universal design for learning in our context and the ways that we've adapted it for our context. But the goal of this workshop is really to get you thinking about your context and how you can take UDL and adapt it for your context, make it relevant for your colleagues, and engage people in a way that creates a better learning environment for everybody with that mind towards inclusivity. So what we'll be covering today. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about the project that we've been working on in our team, designing for diversity and thinking about how we've adapted UDL for our context. We're then going to hear a little bit from some of our team members. They've created a series of small snippet videos. They're all around 2 to 3 minutes each, so not super long. Just to share a little bit about different projects they've been working on, some of the challenges and some of the great solutions and iterations that they've come up with. So we'll start off by thinking about learners' goals and challenges with 2 of our teams, and then we'll go into an activity around discussing your context and thinking about some of the challenges that might exist in your context for the uptake of UDL. We'll then turn to another one of our colleagues, Kriya, to discuss how we might reframe some of those barriers for our learners. So thinking about how we can shape our learning environment, our learners of UDL to be able to engage with those different learning contexts more comprehensively. And then in our second activity, we'll be thinking about some of those challenges that we mentioned in the first activity and thinking about how to reframe those as barriers in your context. And then the last point that we have today is thinking about scaling with solutions and iterations. So again, we're hearing from people in our team, different things that have worked and what they will continue to work on in the future. Because as we know, UDL is an ongoing process of developing different things that work in different contexts. And sometimes you try something and it doesn't work, but that's always something to take on into the future. So we'll be hearing from some of our colleagues in our team who have tried a few different things and are thinking towards the next steps or the next iteration. And then we'll finish up with open discussion about anything else that people would like to share. So yeah, that's kind of what we've got planned for today. I am going to try and not talk too much about our project. There is a lot that we could say, but I do really want this to be a space for people to, collaborate and share. So I won't spend too much time talking about it. But maybe I was just thinking ahead of time so that people can be ready when we get to the activity. I was wondering if Sarah or Sam could share the Google Slides just in case anybody wants to open it up. We also do have a Google Doc available if Google Slides are not accessible for you, or if you would just like to use a Google Doc because you're unfamiliar with Google Slides. But the idea is that they function pretty similarly. The only advantage of Google Slides, which is why we've chosen it today, is that you can more easily switch between the different segments so that you can see what other people have said more easily. So that's why we've chosen to facilitate our activity like that today. But I will get to that and I will explain it in a little bit more detail. It's just to give that information ahead to anybody who would like to open it up. Okay. So, designing for diversity, adapting UDL for our context. So at the University of Sydney, I'm sure like many other tertiary institutions, we have seen an increase in difficulties since the beginning of COVID, essentially. So thinking about how we can engage with students has been a challenge, especially since coming back to campus. So some of the things that we have seen that have been really challenging, and one of the reasons that this project has really taken off and been really seminal and important to our teaching practices, is because we have seen increases in failure rates since 2020. And this has disproportionately affected first year students, international students, and equity students. So as the literature kind of says, in the past, the universities in general haven't been an inclusive space. And I guess in some of these elements, we're seeing some of those issues continue into our current present space. So we're thinking about how can we make it better in 2023? What can we do for our students now that will change things? And this is the kind of background for why we came up with this project. And a big first step for that, or a big part of our step towards this, was thinking about how we could incorporate this in our strategy for 2032. So our 10-year strategy. So you can see here, I just pulled out a couple of snippets there. Our goals are to make our education transformational and to be student focused, and that we want to place emphasis on a community of diversity that thrives, that is inclusive and integrates and welcomes people and creates belonging across the whole campus. So those are the kind of core goals that we have in our strategy going forward, and they kind of come from that background information, thinking about some of those barriers that we've experienced in our context and thinking about how we can lower them to make the University of Sydney a more welcoming place. And some of you will have heard about those challenges with my colleague, Samantha Poulos, on Tuesday, who talked a little bit about the why of UDL at Sydney Uni. So if you didn't get a chance to hear that talk and you would like to know a little bit more about some of the barriers that we're encountering, that's a great talk to maybe go back and have a look at the recording of. But I don't want to dwell on it too much because, as I said, I don't want to take up too much of our space to collaborate today. So our barriers that we were finding for the uptake and engagement with UDL was that the whole UDL guidelines, as we presented them to our colleagues and tried to engage people, was that it was initially quite overwhelming. You know, the guidelines have a lot of checkpoints on them. There's a lot to work through. And if you are working in a context where people are very time poor and they're very overloaded already, it can be really hard to wrap your head around those guidelines. So inspired by the UDL reporting criteria and its focus on barriers and intentional design, our wonderful colleague Sarah Humphrey crafted our Designing for Diversity steps. And the goal behind these were to create a mindset that colleagues could adopt. And in that, our challenge was to adapt the foundations of UDL for our context. So in doing so, we hoped we might lower barriers for our colleagues, foster their engagement with UDL, and reach our overarching goal of creating a better learning environment for all. So we really tried to take the core aspects of the UDL guidelines that we thought were most able to be engaged with and kind of reframed for our context to help our colleagues begin to engage with that UDL space. We do also have people who are much further along their UDL journey and are kind of like our UDL champions. And it's obviously like what the Designing for Diversity project is almost like a springboard to begin exploring lots of other aspects of UDL as well. So it helps us to move from that maybe initial feeling of overwhelming to actually think about how we can get to that iterative process and continue to grow and develop. So those were some of the thought process behind our Designing for Diversity. So we took our kind of UDL framework, and this is just an emblematic image of that. Obviously, the actual guidelines are much bigger. And we moved it into Designing for Diversity, which, as you can see here, are 5 steps. So our first step is focusing on learners, and it asks the question of who are my learners? The second step begins with thinking about goals. What are the goals? What are the learning goals? So sometimes those 2 steps become quite enmeshed, because thinking about the goals and the learners can kind of be an entangled process, as all of these steps don't necessarily happen in this linear way, but that we find they're really good questions to be asking and to be thinking about reframing some of those thought processes that we were kind of coming up against again and again in our context. Our third step is barriers. So what are the barriers to learning? So focusing on the learning environment and what can be changed within that, rather than focusing on the learner themselves. It's more about focusing on the learning environment and what barriers might exist within it. And then our fourth step is solutions. So what's one possible solution to removing a barrier? So thinking about that +1 method that we were hearing a little bit about earlier today. What is something that you can do now without adding to your workload? What's something that can make a significant difference for those learners who are encountering particular barriers? And then in our final step, what are the next steps? What are the iterations? How can you continue to grow this practice and evolve it into its next form? So those are our 5 Designing for Diversity steps. And you can see here that they're very heavily entangled with the UDL guidelines, because as I said before, we really were trying to take that framework and put it into our context to make it accessible for our learners of UDL. So drawing on those foundations for universal design for learning, which seek to create environments where all learners can access and participate in meaningful, challenging learning opportunities, the Designing for Diversity project consolidates the UDL checkpoints and contextualizes these steps for a University of Sydney environment, making these accessible for our educational teams. So again, we're really thinking about who do we need to engage with UDL and how can we do it? And that's sort of the basis of these steps. All right, so I've shared a little bit about our context now, and I am going to go a little bit more into the specifics of it in a minute and share some of the stories from my team about working with our various other colleagues. But I did want to begin here with a thought activity. So you've heard a little bit from me now and a little bit about our adapting of UDL to Designing for Diversity. But I would like you to just take a moment, and we'll take 2 minutes here to think about what challenges does UDL present for your context? Who might your learners of UDL be? And what are your key goals for adopting UDL? So thinking about our Designing for Diversity 5 steps, I'm asking you to think about those first 2 steps, learners and goals essentially, but I've just written them as questions here. So we might just take 2 minutes to do that. I'm going to play some music in the background. It's just a thought process, so you don't have to write anything down. It's just thinking at this stage. And then when we go to activity 1, you'll have a chance to write down and brainstorm. I'm just asking you to think about it without any other priming from me. All right, so I'm just going to play a little bit of some piano music for you for 2 minutes. So 2 minutes to think about your learners and challenges and goals for your context. hopefully that gave you a little bit of a chance to think and reflect on your own contexts. And as I said, we'll be coming back to that, but it's just an opportunity to start thinking. Okay, so I'll just keep going and keep those thoughts in mind. Okay, so hearing from some of the voices on our team about learners' goals and challenges. So we have a short video here. So there's 2 videos. I think it's about a 2.5 minute video with Michelle talking about a project that she has been working on with our other colleague, Aaron. And then in the second video, we have our colleague, Alessandra, talking about a project that she has worked on with another Michelle. And they'll share a little bit about some of the challenges that came up for them in that context. So I'll just play this video. I am going to put the captions on, but you should have access to this after the session as well. All right.
My name is Michelle Harrison, and I work together with educational designer Aaron Baird on this unit. By way of background, this unit appears in the 2nd semester of the 1st year of the Bachelor of Advanced Computing. The cohort size is around 600 students and was identified as one experiencing a higher than average fail rate. The unit coordinator was new to the unit, to the university, and was keen to enhance the experience for students. I'm going to be focusing on the first 2 stages of the Designing for Diversity process, understanding who the learners are, and identifying the learning goals. So who are the learners for this unit? The average age of students in this unit is 19, and so for most, this is their first experience of university. 3/4 of the cohort identified as male, and there was an even breakdown between domestic and international students, with just over 30% of students speaking Mandarin at home and 1/4 English. There was over 30 other languages making up the remainder. Entry into this degree requires quite a high ATAR, with almost 3/4 of students having an entrance score of over 90. And in terms of goals for this unit, one of the expected skills for students going in is to have a good grasp of the coding language Python. Students needed this knowledge in order to succeed. So one of the goals identified was to make sure that students had mastered a basic level of Python and were supported to bridge that gap if they needed to. Secondly, because this was an academically challenging environment, and as we've come to understand, highly competitive, it has the potential to be threatening for some students. For students feeling less confident, the weight of expectation could create extra pressure, making it easier for them to fall behind. For this reason, the second goal was to find ways to diffuse that threat so that they could focus on succeeding in the unit, unhampered by worries of not measuring up.
Right, so that was Michelle sharing a little bit about some of the challenges that came up in that context. And now we're going to hear a little bit from Alessandra and Michelle about a different unit that they were working on and some of the challenges that came up for them in adapting or adopting Designing for Diversity and thinking through UDL as well.
Hi, I'm Michelle, an educational designer in the School of Architecture, Design and Planning.
And I'm Alessandra, also an ed designer at Sydney. Michelle and I first connected to work on a large first-year architecture unit with a high attrition rate. The coordinator had identified students' well-being as a priority, and we suggested creating a simple survey to check in with students starting in week 1. This is something used in many units in the university, but was new to this unit, and this is where things started to go off course.
We had to design a survey and let students provide their feedback week by week so that teaching staff can understand what difficulties students are having, especially for those who feel more comfortable to ask questions privately. The idea was for teaching staff to access the survey responses immediately and provide support. However, the coordinator was not familiar with the engagement survey and concerned that it would be similar to the other surveys that students have been given. She was also very busy in the beginning of the semester. It took some time for the coordinator to understand and feel connected to the survey and to consult with the tutors for their input. What worked in the end? be flexible with the coordinator and tutors. Embed a tool for tutors to create their own survey questions to their groups, and taking the time was needed rather than forcing our timing on them.
So reflecting, we realised that in trying to plan the survey to fit our timeline, our team was working with several coordinators and trying to get ideas implemented in all the units at the start of semester. We'd stumbled by inadvertently forcing the kind of one-size-fits-all, which we're trying to help teachers move away from.
Yes, what we needed to do was slow down and understand what challenges that the coordinator had faced in the teaching of this unit previously, and understand the needs of the unit, what goal the coordinator wants to achieve, then incorporate the needs and requests from the coordinator and tutors to the universal design learning activity.
So we'll be evaluating the success of the survey during the semester. And in the meantime, the serendipity is that the difficulty of the project necessitated more sustained collaboration than if things had gone more smoothly, enabling Michelle and I to get to know each other and create a really nice connection for future projects.
All right. So that was a really fantastic example from Michelle and Alessandra about some of the challenges that they faced in actually beginning that designing for diversity process with their colleagues that they were working with to uptake and modify the unit that they were working on. So those are just two examples that we have from our team where they were tackling learners' goals and challenges. I'm just going to go to the next activity. So what we have now, as I said, you'll have an opportunity here to expand on some of your thinking in that previous little thought exercise that we did, to actually think about some of the challenges that might be coming up in your context with your learners and goals that you might like to achieve with UDL. So thinking about your context, can you identify the challenges your learners of UDL tend to experience? Your learners could be students, colleagues, staff, anyone who you might need to communicate with. So in one of our previous ADCET meetings, some of our colleagues in the meeting were saying that they were thinking about how to use UDL guidelines within their communication. So that also might be something that you might be thinking about in your context. So maybe your learners, some of these just are a list of challenges that I thought of, but you might want to add to them, modify them, or change them, or have something completely different. So maybe your learners misunderstand what UDL is, like in the example that I gave of designing for diversity, having that feeling of being overwhelmed by the UDL guidelines. They might bring up the same questions or excuses for or barriers for them for adopting UDL, ask for alternative explanations. They might disengage, or maybe they're unresponsive. So any of these challenges that might come up for you in your context. So I'll just exit my sharing for a second. So I would like everybody, if they could now, to pop over to the Google Slides or Google Doc if that works better for you. And we'll be doing the first activity. So we have quite a few people here. So to break that up, I've just put the slides into basically whatever your first name is, the first letter of your first name, if you can find the slide that corresponds to that. So slide 3 for A to E, slide 4 for F to J, slide 5 for K to P, and slide 6 for Q to Z. So for example, my name being Ella, I would go to slide 3. And just think about those questions that I had. You should have access to the slides so you can scroll back to the questions at any time to clarify what you're thinking. But here are the kind of dot points that I would like you to fill in. So right below at least 2 challenges your learners face. There will also be an opportunity to discuss this as a group when we come back together. So if you prefer to share vocally, there will be an opportunity for that too. So if you can share 2 challenges, and then if you use the comment function to maybe share some thoughts that you might have about what other colleagues are saying, please, we would love that kind of interactivity. if you're able to. So for example, I've just done an example here. I highlighted this, and then I went up to the top here where it says, or it has that little plus icon, like the image there, and I've just added a comment to my own comment. But if someone writes something that you think really speaks to your context or you have an idea about, please feel free to share. So we might take 10 minutes to do this, or we'll see how everyone's going at about the 5-minute mark. And then if people are still working, we'll keep going for 10 minutes. But if you get to the 5-minute mark and you have written your 2 challenges, that might be a good opportunity to flip over to offering some comments for people. If you are still thinking at that 5-minute mark, that might be the kind of opportunity to start writing. And I did notice, thank you, Marit, for letting me know that the piano music was really distracting. I'm really sorry about that. I was thinking maybe in this next segment, I would play some raindrops, so it won't have that variation in the melodic aspect, but it will still kind of operate as having that white noise. But if it is really distracting for you and you would prefer not to have any noise, please feel free to just mute the computer as well, and I'll make sure that I kind of signal visually that we're coming back as well as audibly. All right, so I'll check in with everyone in about 5 minutes to see how everyone's going. But yeah, if you could share a little bit about some of the challenges that you're facing and then think about what other people have written and engage with that, that would be fantastic. right. I'm just waving so that anyone who had their volume off can see that I'm signaling. So we're at about the 5-minute mark now. I can see that people are still typing and some people have started to comment, but I think a lot of people are still working. So I might give everyone another 3 minutes or so, just to, if you haven't had an opportunity to comment on other people's slides yet, ideas yet, or you are still thinking about your own ideas, let's just take another 3 minutes to think through or respond or read some of the other people's ideas. These slides will be available to you afterwards as well, so you'll have a chance to peruse these in more detail and maybe see what other people are tackling in their context as well. But I do encourage you to go in and have a go at commenting or responding to people's ideas if you've got the opportunity to do that now. So let's take another 3 minutes or so just to think through or respond to somebody else. All right, I'll just pause there and I'm just waving again to let anyone who's got their volume turned off that we're back. I did just add 2 extra slides because I noticed, and one of my colleagues sent me a message in the chat to say that the slides were getting a little bit too crowded. So if you found that you didn't have any space or you ran out, please feel free to use these 2 slides to contribute as well. But it's great to see everybody's thoughts coming in, lots of ideas there, lots of things to share. And I can see people are being really active in responding to others, which is great. That's really what we want, that kind of cross collaboration and communication. So please feel free to keep doing that if you're working in that mode or you still have some ideas to share. But I did also just want to give anyone who would like to share verbally or vocally to give them the chance to put their hand up and unmute and share their ideas. It's absolutely not necessary. If you don't feel like you want to, don't feel any pressure that you should, but I just wanted to give anyone who felt that was the best way for them to share their ideas the opportunity to do so, because we'd love to hear them if you would like to share them.
Hi, Ella. I can't turn my camera on, but I wouldn't mind commenting on, in all the slides, there's at least a few comments about time commitments and workload, and there's not enough time, which I find that really interesting, because it is much easier to I guess it's not it's not time, it's more the thinking. It's probably not the doing time, it's perhaps more the thinking time, because we're developing new materials anyway, so it's just doing something that you're already doing in a different way. So I'd like to have some feedback from others on the call, what it exactly is that is the time problem, and then how we might address it, because I get that comment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be really challenging as well, because as you say, like, you might be producing new material anyway, but it might be that thought process of like, how can I do it differently than I've done it before to make it more accessible, that takes the time. But I can see Kriya has her hand up, so maybe she has a thought to add.
I was just going to say that I've had that same comment made to me many times too, about, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. There is so much that I want to do. And I think I refer back to Ella's earlier comment and some ideas that are being shared in other workshops around just doing small incremental steps. And I have a relationship with a particular academic where, you know, we just try one or two things, see how it goes, use that feedback to inform the next step forward. And I think that just reduces the sense that this is just so much. But I hear the same comment all the time too.
Yeah, thank you, Kriya. And I can see some people are responding in the chat as well, which is great to see. So we've got Sam mentioning also perhaps a fear of the assumed time it will take up. And Sarah is also saying it may also be helpful to think about it if you're trying something new. What are you also prepared to stop doing? So thinking about how you can balance the new things with things that you have to let go. So some great suggestions there. I'm aware of time and it's passing quickly. So I will power on just so that we don't run out of time. But thank you, everybody, and continue sharing in the chat or adding to the slides, whichever mode is easiest for you. All right. So I did want to just move on to our next kind of point here, and I'll go back into presentation mode so that I don't forget to do that. Thinking about how we can reframe some of these challenges as barriers for the learner. So thinking about our learning environment. And we have Kriya Coleman, who also just shared some ideas to talk a little bit about some of the barriers that she's encountered. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your unit that you've been working on, Kriya?
Yes, thanks, Ella. I've been working with a unit coordinator from a Masters of International Business program. And the unit that she came to talk with us about is a first year unit. And she has a student cohort that is very diverse. The diversity that she shared initially was a diversity around language and cultural backgrounds. But of course, when we unpacked that diversity a little bit further, there were lots of other things going on. The initial discussion that we started having was around her assessment plan. She had some assessments that she was concerned had some issues with contract cheating in the past, and she wanted to fix this. And so we used the Designing for Diversity lens to explore what was happening there. And as we were doing that and talking about the barriers for students in engaging with the assessment task, the first challenge was trying to reframe the barrier from being a barrier that the students were responsible for to being a barrier that was perhaps more within the control of the unit coordinator in terms of the way that she was designing the assessment. So just to give you a bit more information about the assessment task, it was a take-home task. However, it was a really short release task. Students only had 1 week from receiving the task to submitting the task. And the other feature of the task was that it was an off-the-shelf case study, which meant that it was very freely available and it had been used repeatedly. One of the things that we established as we delved into this situation was that the short release nature of the task was putting significant pressure on students. And because the case study was readily searchable just by Googling it, students were tempted, because they were pressured, to go and find other solutions to preparing something quickly that they felt would meet the expectations of their unit coordinator or of their teachers. So in terms of how we reframed that barrier, the approach that we are now taking, and I must confess that we're right in the middle of this activity at the moment, we're thinking about designing fresh case studies, and we're thinking about providing students with activities that may give them the context of the case study in advance, so that when it comes to having a short release task, they feel like they're better prepared or better able to tackle the task that seems like it might have been onerous before. So that's the first example. And on the next slide, I have another example. This is an example from the same unit of study with the same cohort. In this case, it was interesting at the outset, the academic was concerned about wanting to have greater participation from her students in her weekly tutorial sessions. We were discussing what participation looked like, and initially the pushback I was getting was that participation really needed to be oral contributions, that it needed to be students speaking up in class and sharing their perspectives, having done some pre-work and coming to class well prepared and being articulate. And the approach that was being taken at the time was that the academic was tracking all contributions to class and giving a participation mark as a consequence. When we were discussing this, it took a while to unpack, but what we identified in the conversation was that because of the cultural and linguistic diversity of her cohort, there was a lot at stake with oral participation. And that in itself was inhibiting students putting their hand up to speak. The diversity of cultural backgrounds and academic backgrounds also meant that students didn't necessarily feel confident, having had experience in the type of participation that she was expecting from them. A lot of the students were studying for the first time in Australia and just didn't have a handle of, what participation looked like here. So in addressing the barrier that sounded like it resided with a flaw in the students, we stopped and considered how we could change the definition of participation and think about opening the door to other types of participation, thinking about having discussion forums that students could participate in, doing a little bit more think, pair, share type approach so that students have the time to formulate their thinking prior to orally sharing their ideas. And then the significant thing that we've put in place this time around is a weekly reflection about participation and engagement that gives students an opportunity to think about their own participation, their master's students, hopefully having an opportunity to sort of do a bit of meta thinking about, well, how am I participating and how is that contributing to my learning? And so as the semester unfolds, we're hoping to see that there will be a growth in students' confidence and capability to participate with the ideas and the concepts that are being shared in the classroom. But I mentioned that we're partway through the semester. One of the interesting things is going to be to see whether or not this works. And if it doesn't work, trying some different approaches. Thanks, Ella.
Thank you, Kriya. And I'm aware that we're running very short of time. So what I actually thought I might do is we might just put a pin in this activity for a minute, because we have another video from two of our great colleagues who have thought a little bit more about solutions and iterations. And I thought I'll play this a little bit for you. And then maybe in your own time, you can come back to the second activity and I'll go through and comment and respond to people as they kind of come up with ideas. So let's just hear a little bit from Min and Monique.
Hello, my name is Min and I'm an educational designer in the Educational Innovation team at the University of Sydney. Today, I'd like to talk about learning spaces. We've been working together with a first-year biology team, looking to identify barriers in the learning space and the challenges that this introduces into the classroom. This unit of study has a large and diverse cohort of 1,500 students. The students spend a lot of time in the lab, and each of these labs has up to 60 students. The learning space is made up of a series of long benches, and this is a top view of one of those benches. Each of these benches seats up to 16 students. Down the centre of these benches is a series of fixed computer monitors. These monitors are used to display learning activities for the students, as well as being used as an electronic notebook. The inclusion of technology has many added benefits in this environment, but in this
All right, sorry, I'm going to have to pause there because we're running out of time and I can see Darlene is waving at me. I would really encourage you to come and watch these videos because Min has done a fantastic exploration of how to utilize space. And Monique talks a lot about what next iterations look like in the unit that she's been working on. So I would love for you to watch these and then maybe go and complete that second activity. And I'm really sorry we ran out of time, but there's just so much to talk about and share. So I apologize for that. And I apologize, Darlene, for running over.
That's fine. Thank you, Ella and team. It was a great presentation and it was fabulous to see the engagement on the Google Forms. I won't, there's so much I could say, but we really do need to set up for the next session. I encourage you all to come to our last session, which is a student panel. We have two fabulous students talking about their experience through an UDL lens, which is a half-an-hour session. So I really encourage you to come over to that session as our final for today. So thank you, Ella. Thank you, Sarah, and the rest of the team. It's fabulous to hear what you said are doing. It's innovational. It's great. Let's keep the conversations going. Take care, everybody, and all the resources will be on ADCET and the video as well. Thank you.